Namaste. So does everyone know what namaste means? Who wants to say? What does namaste mean? Yes. I behold the Christ in you. Yeah, and we can say it in a more universal way, which is the God in me beholds and bows to the God in you. Yeah? Very nice. The light within me salutes the light within thee. It rhymes. So we've been talking about Christ consciousness this whole month. And what Christ consciousness is, our basic universal truth principle is, and we say universal truth principle because it has to be true everywhere. It can't just be true in some places. So you can find this truth principle in all the world's religions and philosophies and see it in all life, which is there's only one power, one presence, and it's in, through, and as all creation and yet never limited by that creation. It is immanent and transcendent, but there's only one. So there's no place where it stops, because if it were to stop and something else began, then it would be finite. So it's infinite. And as it's infinite, there's no place where it's not. So all that we are is this life of God. Someone posed a question, and they quoted Father Thomas Keating in saying that we are not all God, but we are part God. And I just asked, well, what's the rest of us? So there's only one substance that's animating this whole universe, this one source. And we're all made in this image and likeness of God. So in this room right now, there's only really one thing happening, and that's God, the I am presence. However, even as there's only one, it has a unique way of expressing itself. So even though there's only one here, we are all unique emanations and expressions of this one. So just as we all have our individual thumbprints, we have our individual soul prints. We do not make ourselves individuals. We don't have to do anything to be unique. We are inherently unique out of our oneness. So it's this wonderful paradox. We always know we're in a place of truth when we're in paradox, which is infinitely one and infinitely diverse. And so we get to enjoy when we come together. Why I love coming here on a Sunday morning is to be in the diversity and the oneness all at once. None of us has to be walking the same path. We can all have our own individual practices, but when we come here together, we also are consciously recognizing together that we're all one, that there's no separation between us. And so this practice of saying and bowing, I bow, Edie said, to the Christ within you, and that's even more holy because that's saying, I'm not only bowing to the God, this infinite I am that is everywhere, but I am bowing to that unique expression of God. So Buddha's self, the Atman self, that unique expression of wholeness and perfection that is in you. So the eternal part of me that is never birthed and never dies. That part of me that can never be hurt, harmed, or endangered. That part of me that has never been hurt, harmed, and endangered, and I can never add on to it. I can never make it more, and I can never make it less. It's always whole. That's the transcendent part of me, but it's in me, and it's unique. And so when I bow to you, I see that uniqueness and that wholeness and the perfection of God that is you. Namaste. I behold the God, the Christ presence, the Buddha presence, the individual I am that is uniquely expressing as you. And that's the greatest way we can live our life. So that's the Christ consciousness in which we are cultivating and nurturing in ourselves. And then last week I talked about the shadow side, which is we are still in the relative temporary. We have this, again, the paradox of the absolute and the relative. The absolute that is timeless and spaceless, and then the relative that is temporary. We're all temporary here, and most of us have our identity not just with this absolute self, but with our human self, with all our history and our stories and our genetic coding and our relationship with our family and the relationship with our school and the relationship with our environment and our culture, and all of that impacts how we behave in the world. And so what we find is that we have all these emotions and feelings, and what we were talking about last week is we have to actually humanly see those. In the infinite I am, that pure presence, when we're in that place, anyone who's had those ecstatic states, we don't see the shadow side, the human side, the temporary side. But when we're in that human mindset, which we are most of our time, we still see with human eyes. And so we need to own. So last week was about owning those parts of ourselves that we project. So if we feel there's a lot of anger out there, or a lot of control, or a lot of jealousy, what are some just negative feelings out there, it's because we haven't owned it in ourselves. If we're triggered by it, we can see it, but if we're not triggered by it, then we've said, oh, well, that's in me. So we were talking about what anger is in me, what violence do I have, what sadness do I have, what victimhood do I have, and anything that triggers us out there is something that we want to own in ourselves. And why do we want to do that? This is the key, and it's also going to be about forgiveness as well. If we don't own it and we just go to transcendence, it's called disassociation. So if I just say there's anger, or I don't really say that I feel the anger, if I haven't yet owned that I feel this, I'm not transcending, I'm just pushing it away. I'm pretending it's not part of me. But when we own it and we understand it, so I was talking about having anger in my very early life, having no understanding of it. I couldn't transcend it because it was just this anger arising that I had no understanding. Then I went to therapy for several years, got a real deep understanding of the anger, and then when I witnessed it from that Christ presence, from that whole perspective, without judgment, now I had deep understanding of what was behind that anger, and it was my anger, and it had all this history and story to it, and this divine compassion just starts to dissipate. And that's when we not only transcend it, but we transform it, because we've felt it. And this is what forgiveness does. Forgiveness takes whatever judgment, whatever is, and it constricts. It constricts our heart like this. And when we forgive, it opens. And there's light. There's a wonderful children's exercise where you put a knapsack full of lots of rocks in the backpack, and you make them walk around for a while. And then you take all the rocks out of the backpack and ask them to walk around without the rocks. And of course, it's very light. And we say that's what forgiveness does. It relieves us of all that heaviness. So forgiveness is the recognition that every person on this planet is made in the image and likeness of God, that we are beholding the Christ, the wholeness and the perfection within everybody. And so the only reason why anybody would ever hurt anybody or do something painful, or we would hurt ourselves, is because we have never known or we have forgotten who we are. One way of saying that is it's ignorance. We have a lot of ignorance, meaning I've never learned who I am, or I've learned who I am and I've had temporary amnesia and forget who I am. And other people forget who they are. That's the only way we hurt one another. Because if we were all fully enlightened beings, if we were all fully awake to our Christ self, we would never hurt one another, because we would recognize that anything I do to you, I'm doing to me. There's no separation between you and me. Anytime I hurt myself, no one's an island. If I hurt myself, I'm hurting everybody in this room. So I would recognize that hurting me isn't just about my own self-hatred. I'm hating the world. And when we start waking up to that reality of there's only one thing happening, and we fully are immersed in that, we don't hurt. And this is the place and the energy from which forgiveness comes. We recognize that the people who are hurting us, or when we have hurt ourselves, it's because we've just forgotten. And that's where the compassion can come in. I've forgotten who I am. They have forgotten who they are. And then we can move to forgiveness. And it's always important to say that when we open our hearts in forgiveness, we are not condoning certain behavior and saying it's okay. So my best example of this is when I used to work in a psychiatric hospital. There were oftentimes patients who would lash out, get very angry and violent, and they would become very destructive, either to themselves, to other people. And so our job was then they would have a takedown, and we all were in charge of a limb. And we had to take a limb and take them down. And while we're doing this, often they're yelling and spitting and calling us every name under the sun. And I worked in the East Coast at the time, and they had, to me, a much nicer way. They put people in what we call safety suits, which was it encloses them versus spreads them out. And they would find it actually calming just to be in the safety suit. But I had a nurse, and she asked me once, she said, well, Harriet, I don't understand. Every time we do a takedown, you're so calm. And I was surprised by that. And she said, well, what are you doing? And I realized I was doing it, and I hadn't realized that other people were feeling it. when I would take that person down, I was usually the leg person. I was not strong enough for the arms because there was 2 people on the leg, so I had help. I would be focusing on the leg, but at the same time, I'd always be focusing on the wholeness and the perfection of the person with whom I was taking down. I was always seeing, this is only God, there is only God, there is only God, and I would just hold that. So on the one hand, and this is the paradox, we're living as divine human beings. We're always wanting to keep our consciousness and our wholeness, to see the wholeness in people, everyone, even though people who are hurting us, but at the same time taking the precautions to protect ourselves and other people, whatever that looks like. There's one young gentleman, he was in 8th grade actually, but he was already playing minor league baseball. And he used to have these fits of temper, and he had done a lot of damage in his home. So he'd come into the psychiatric hospital. We worked with him. He was just a great kid, and I loved being with him. He was there for several weeks, and then it was time for him to be released. And the day he was to be released, he just completely went crazy again, just violence, just bang, destroying the front part of our unit. And so he had to be restrained. And I went and talked with him, and he said, I don't want to go home. I did that. That was an intentional purpose because I can't control myself, and I know my parents can't control me, and I love them, and I don't want to hurt them. But I don't know, I still can't control this rage, and I feel safe in here. I feel safe. And I remember a teacher used to say to me, there's no one who hates being a monster more than the monster. So there are people who are doing very destructive things, and it's our job, as we had that reading today of being the spiritual revolutionary, it's our job, it's our mandate to hold the truth of who they are. They need somebody in this world to hold the truth of who they really are, because that's the only way that healing can start happening for them and for ourselves. So we're not walking around angry and constricted. So we can open and have a heart wide open, even as we're saying, that's not okay, but I love you. It's not okay, but I love you. So we have all this that's been happening in Ferguson, Missouri this past week. I always find things out actually really quickly from Twitter. And I found out about Mike Brown being shot actually before Robin Williams on Twitter. But it actually didn't show up in the news until several days later. So Mike Brown was an African-American youth who was shot and killed, and he was unarmed. And there has been so then there began protests in Ferguson, Missouri, and the police came out in sort of paramilitary tear gas, and it was very violent and aggressive, and so people started protesting that. And New York, Times Square was shut down because there were so many thousands of people protesting the march, what was happening in Ferguson. So there's been this incredible uprising over this youth's death. And I think that's fabulous. I mean, that's how we start moving into social justice. People are getting more and more angry at African-American youths getting shot and killed without reason. But what we want to do is to remember that even as we may be protesting unjust ways of being, we don't hate and have the police officers then be other. They're the authority, and we don't like them because now we've just created another wall. So what we want to do is exactly follow in the what Gandhi and King did was they took these principles that Jesus taught and they did it towards governments. They did it not just towards individuals. So if you have any challenge with your bosses, with your work life, with the government, with the environment, way people, or some political party that's opposite of your political party, the place you have to start is holding and knowing that not only are there individual souls, there are group souls. And so everything, the government has a group soul. The police department has a group soul. Your boss and the executive board of your business has a group soul. Your family has a group soul. Your friends have a group soul. And to hold the wholeness and the perfection that transcends this whole story of pain and hurt, of the dualistic battling that goes back and forth between the two poles, and hold that wholeness. That doesn't mean you don't take action. And that's why Gandhi and King were so powerful. They always took action, but never forgot the wholeness. I was reading Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography years ago, which is great. It's called My Experiments with Truth. And he's very honest about everything as he's working on himself as well as, so he's always working on himself as well as the government and justice. And I remember reading a letter he wrote to England. And it was very clear that they were not welcome in India, but the amount of respect that was in that letter, that amount of just complimenting what they brought to the world and their goodness. And I remember being so surprised, because it's always like this little man beat off the great bad British Empire, but he never referred to them as evil or bad. He referred to them with incredible amounts of respect, while at the same time standing up for them. This is our life. Behold and forgive. Behold and forgive. Always work on yourself and on each other there's no place too big. You can do it the whole planet, the whole cosmos, and there's no place too small. Your animals, your plants. Behold and forgive. Behold and forgive. Everyone is the life of God, and all the pain is out of ignorance, out of suffering. Have forgiveness for others for being ignorant. Finally, I just can't end without talking about Robin Williams, who took his life. And what I found was a lot of my friends were writing a lot about Robin Williams this past week. And my friends that I have that are close have been on this spiritual journey for a really long time. And what I felt was an incredible resonance. Because Robin Williams was someone who wasn't ignorant. He had a lot of self-understanding of why he did his addictive behaviors, why he did things that weren't always for his highest good or for his family's highest good. He couldn't claim ignorance. He couldn't claim lack of understanding. And he certainly was an incredibly kind and generous and compassionate person. Every person that I read, from strangers who met him, I read an article in USA Today about a guy who just happened to sit down because there was no space at lunch with him, having no idea who he was. And then someone came over and asked for an autograph, and they got into a conversation. And he said, and then the next of my lunch, I was just entertained the whole lunch. He just went full on, just for me, no one else was around. Just entertained me. He was so loving and so generous to the people who were closest to him. He was so loving and so generous. So here we have an incredibly sensitive, kind, compassionate, creative, fully expressed man who was also very intelligent, who knows himself, knows his behaviors, and still he couldn't overcome them. And I think this is more important for those of us who have been on the spiritual journey for quite a long time, because what I find is there's a lot of people who said, well, I've done my forgiveness work. I've done this work, and there gets to be a point where I should know better. I shouldn't fall down. I shouldn't fall back again. I already know. And it gets to the point where you get tired, like, I'm doing it again. I did it again. I know better. I shouldn't be doing this. I have all the wisdom, I have all the understanding, and I still do something that's self-destructive or hurtful to other people. I still do it. When is there enough forgiveness? There's always enough forgiveness. And that's what we have to learn. That as long as we are on this spiritual journey, we're not forgiving just 7 times 70. We're forgiving 700 trillion times 700 trillion. We are forgiving for as long as we are in this human body, we are going to be limited human beings. We may have all this great spiritual information, all this great wisdom, but we are still human beings. We are still have this part of us that is limited. And so every day we need to carry into this place of forgiveness of ourselves for still being human. Yes, we are whole, perfect, and complete. And yes, we're always going to drop down just a little bit less than we think we should be. I've talked about before that we have our spiritual ideals up here. That's the Christ consciousness. This is our wholeness. This is our ideal. And then we have down here who we actually are in our human body. And what they say is suffering is that gap in between. And that gap, as long as we're still in this human body and have any identity with this finite self, we're going to have a gap. And that means every day, they say suffering is that gap. So every day we are forgiving ourselves for that gap. We know this is true about us. We know it. We've experienced it. We've been in meditation. We've had these incredible experiences with other people. It's incredible. This is who we are. I know that, but I still come down here and I do something hurtful to myself, which again hurts everybody, or I hurt somebody else intentionally. Forgive. Forgive yourself constantly. There is no end to forgiveness. It is infinite. As long as we are in these bodies, forgive infinitely. Behold infinitely and forgive infinitely. And so this is our invitation for this week. My invitation is more than anything else, practice beholding. Of course we want to behold ourselves, but just like everyone is mirrors for us, what I find is if I really start working on beholding the wholeness and the perfection, the Buddha, the Christ, the Atman within each and every person with whom I come in contact, it's who's doing the beholding. I'll start feeling it within myself. I'll start feeling that wholeness effortlessly. If I'm really focused on seeing that Christ within them, it's reminding me that that Christ is within me as well. So that's my invitation this week. Be passionate. Be so completely absorbed in seeing and beholding every person with whom you come in contact. And not just the physical people, but people who come in contact across your mind. I love Reverend Joan Stedman used to say, are people safe who show up in our mind? Those names, are they safe coming across my mind's awareness? Am I holding them in light, or am I judging them as I'm thinking about their names as they cross my mind? Infinite compassion, infinite beholding. It's the greatest gift we can give this planet. Behold each other, behold all the news that we're hearing that's going on around, the pain, and forgive everybody. Forgive yourself over and over and over again. Are you willing to do that? Try it, work on it, practice it? A little bit? A lot of it? All right. Because if not us, who, right? All right, so let us pray. There is only one power, one presence in this universe. It is in, through, and as all creation. It is all that I am. It is all that we are. There is never anything outside of this one power, this one presence that is infinitely good. This goodness where there is no opposite. This love where there is no opposite. This wholeness and this perfection. This freedom, this generosity, this beauty, this harmony, this creativity where there is no opposite. It is all one. And how grateful I am to know that each and every one of us is made and created from this oneness where there is no duality, where there is only infinite love, where there's only good, there is only peace, there is only joy. That this is the source and sustenance of every atom and cell of our body temples. It is the source and sustenance of our emotional life. It is the source and sustenance of our mental and intellectual life. It is the source and sustenance of our energy body and our causal body and every level and dimension of our being. We are this wholeness and this perfection now. That which within us that has never been hurt, harmed, or endangered and never can be. That which within us and as us now that we can never add on to or take away from. It is always magnificently beautiful, radiant, powerful. It is the source of our very breath. It is the source of our thoughts. It's the source of our feelings. It's the source of our relationships. It's the source of our finances. It's the source of our business life, our community life. It is the source of everything that we express on this planet. It is the source of our uniqueness. It is everything, and it is who we are now, and we fully claim and accept the true identity that we were born into and as. And even as we are this beautiful, magnificent wholeness and perfection, we know that this wholeness and perfection includes all that finite expression, includes all that we are in this finite world, our history, our personalities, our genetics, our family history, our cultural history, our national history, our global history, our cosmic history. It includes all of it now. It is infinitely intelligent, and it knows every feeling, thought, and experience that we've ever had. It knows all the good we have done. It knows all the bad we have done. And it loves all of us without judgment, without condition, without limit, without borders. This is the truth of who and what we are, that we are always seen, known, and loved. There is never a time where we are not completely loved in all of our humanness, in all of our limitation, in all of the ways that we wish we were better, the way that we show up and the ways we don't show up. It is all of it, and it is all absolutely unconditionally loved. And as we embody and feel that at the very depths of our being, we know this is true of every being on this planet. All our sisters and brothers who walk this journey of life with us, They are each and every one of them made in the image and likeness of God. So it is our job as leaders of light, of conscious leaders of light, to hold this truth, to hold this wholeness for all the places of the depths of darkness that are happening on this planet that we seem to see more than we've ever seen before. We hold the light and the truth and the freedom and the power and the glory of the living God at the center of all beings, individuals and groups, of planet, of plants, of animals, of galaxies upon galaxies. We see only wholeness, and we forgive all of us, including ourselves, for any judgment that we hold that we're not enough. All that judgment of not enoughness for ourselves and for other people, we forgive ourselves 70 trillion times 70 trillion times, infinitely. And with that softness of heart, with that tenderness of intimate oceanic love, I just say thank you, thank you, thank you, Mother, Father, God. This love is closer to us than our very breath, and this love loves each and every one of us passionately and intimately. And I am so grateful that this love is even now fulfilling its vision, its purpose, its light, as all of us in this room now. We are the leaders of light, and we join all leaders of light to create heaven on earth now. And so as in deep abiding gratitude, I just let this word be now. I completely release it, take my hands off of it, and knowing it is through the action of the law of love, it truly is already done. And I invite us all to say together now, and so it is. Amen. Amen.